Hi everyone. If you're a solution or a software architect looking to improve either the reliability or the security of your software system, or both of those qualities for that matter, the ambassador design pattern is one of the architectural patterns that you may want to consider. Besides being a pattern often used in microservice architectures, the ambassador is actually applicable in many more use cases. For example, if we look at the well-architected framework by Microsoft for cloud workloads, for which I made another video, um, you can see that the ambassador pattern is recommended when you want to make your workload more reliable or more secure. This is the point of view that I'm taking in this video. I'm going to describe use cases that are more general than just microservices. So let's talk about the ambassador and what it does. Well, first of all, I want to make a point for all of those developers that are used to working with object-oriented design patterns, such as the adapter or the wrapper, which work on the class level of a software. The ambassador is actually an architectural design pattern and not an OOP pattern. It works at the system level. So the system level, we have things like network connectivity. We're either solving a problem at network connectivity or integration between components or subsystems, or we're solving a problem at the data layer, or we're solving a problem at the service layer itself. So in this case, the ambassador is solving the problem at the connection layer. So if we look at the system, we often have components that need to remotely talk to each other, remotely being they're not hosted on the same server or in the same environment. So if we have a client component or client application, we often have situations where we want to talk to a remote service. So as I mentioned, the client is hosted somewhere. That's a host. And the remote service is hosted somewhere else. So in order to have the two components communicating together, meaning we want the clients to be sending the requests, which are usually HTTP or HTTPS requests. And we want to receive responses from the service. There are certain connectivity functionalities that need to be implemented both in the client application and in the server, the remote service applications. So those things include, for example, routing, where is the request going to go, retry if you want to retry in the case where the remote service is not responding for a certain time, etc. So we may also want to include handling of TLS certificates, monitoring of latency, and things like that. So where I see a lot of confusion when I look at articles written by people all over the internet is people don't usually understand well the difference between an ambassador and a gateway API or a gateway type of pattern. So I'm going to explain this difference here. The ambassador is a pattern that is used to implement connectivity components on behalf of the client application. So if for any reason we want to have our connectivity functionalities implemented in a supporting service or proxy service, we would implement them in what we call an ambassador. So instead of talking directly to the remote service, our application will now be talking to the sending requests to the ambassador and receiving the responses from the ambassador, and the ambassador will be the one talking to the remote service. So it's an out-of-process service that is working on behalf of the client. In the case where we want to implement connectivity functionalities on behalf of the remote service, that's where I'm a developer for the remote service workload, and I want to decide how a request hits my services that the backend I have here. What's happening? How is it routed? If I have more than one service, for example, I have service A and service B. How is the request routed to it? So I have I may need to offload the connectivity functionalities to something else, which in this case is doing a function, assuming a function very similar to the ambassador, but it's on the service side. And in this case, it's a gateway. Can be a gateway API. There are different gateway patterns that you may want to implement. For example, gateway offloading for offloading like general connectivity functionalities from the service side. You may have a gateway router, etc. And all of this can be part of an entire gateway API. So when I'm talking about an ambassador, I'm talking about the component or the service, out-of-process service working for the client. I may want to implement functionalities such as, for example, retry or circuit breaking. Or TLS, or authentication, or monitoring. So I can see the latency of requests from the moment I send the request to the moment I get a response from the remote services. So when I implement those functionalities on behalf of the client application, I'm working with an ambassador design pattern. The use cases for this offloading of functionalities, connectivity functionalities, will be, for example, if my client application is a legacy application and it is not easy to go in and extend the connectivity functionalities by adding all of those things for some reason. It can also be if I have multiple client applications. For example, I have client A and here I have client B. And they're both written in different languages, for example, Java and C++ or Python or whatever. In this case, if I wanted to implement, for example, a retry or circuit breaker, and those are the same functionalities for different applications, but my applications are written in different languages, which would be, for example, the use case for microservices, then I would have to do a different implementation for the same functionality, same connectivity functionality from the client side within each different client and maintain it separate. So this is one of the use cases where we want to use an ambassador to export or to offload those connectivity functionalities. Now, there are cases where we don't want to use an ambassador, it's not suitable. those are kind of the anti-patterns. So an anti-pattern for using an ambassador, for example, would be if all of my applications are written in the same language. In this case, what I can do is I can build a library for that language with all the connectivity functionalities and distribute it to every developer that's working on the different applications, and they just integrate it in their code base for the application and run them in the same process. Now, this being an out-of-process service, there is a certain overhead between here and here. So you're sending requests, you're receiving responses, and that means you're adding some overhead in terms of the communication. That causes a latency. It is usually a very minor latency, but if you have a very latency critical application where latency is extremely important, you may want to look at a way to not use an ambassador. You may want to integrate those functionalities directly in the client application to reduce as much as possible the latency, to remove that overhead of communicating between two different processes. So there is different ways we can deploy an ambassador. We can, if our client applications are containers, which would be the case in microservices application, for example, then we want to do the same for the ambassador. We want to use we want to containerize it and use it as a sidecar. Sidecar pattern is essentially, it comes from the idea of a sidecar of a motorbike. So you have something that runs along with the main thing, in this case the bike, or the side container, the sidecar container runs along with the client application. If the client application is not running, well, there's no point for the ambassador to be running. So they both go together. They both like live and die together. So they have separated but related life cycles and processes. If I want to be able to use the ambassador across my entire host, so anything I put on that host, not necessarily containerized, I want it to run with that ambassador. In that case, I may want to deploy the ambassador as either a daemon service or a Windows service. So that explains all the things that we need to take into consideration when we use the ambassador design pattern. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'm looking forward to talking to you about architectural best practices and design patterns. See you later.